Welcome to the Brilliantly Resilient podcast. What's your train wreck? Everyone has one. The question is, are you just visiting or are you going to live there? I'm Mary Fran Bontempo. Join me and let's learn how to come through those train wrecks, not broken, but brilliant. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Brilliantly Resilient podcast. I am your host, Mary Fran Bontempo, and today I have a new friend with me. I met J.Cooperstein, oh gosh, I guess it's almost a year ago now, right? At an author's night, an author's panel at which we were both speaking, and she just has such a fascinating story that I really wanted to bring her to your attention and get to know her a little better. So, J.Cooperstein, from Five Diamond Concierge to customer experience strategist, J.Cooperstein knows what it truly means to serve. With over a decade behind the concierge desk, ooh, good stories, Jamie now helps companies, employees, and students elevate the customer experience in ways that are practical, human, and unforgettable. She's a former president of the Philadelphia Area Concierge Association, and she brings real-world credibility and heart to every stage she steps on. I can attest to that. 2025, she added author to her resume with her memoir, True Hospitality, Lessons Learned from Behind the Concierge Desk, which was named a finalist in the Next Generation Indie Book Awards. And she also is the founder of J.Cooperstein Hospitality Consulting. Jamie, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks, Mary Fran. I am ecstatic to have a conversation with you today.
So when we first met, and you and I were just talking about this a little bit before we jumped on and started to record, but when we first met, we were at speaking together separately, but together at the same event. And I have to tell you, as soon as you got up and started speaking about your life and your career and how it's not exactly how you pictured yourself ending up and all that, I thought, boy, this girl's had to dig into some resilience. And you really, really did. So let's start where your story starts with what you thought life was going to be, and then how it took the curve and you had to evolve along with that.
Sure. I'm excited to tell the tale. So from a very early age, I emphatically wanted to be a sports journalist. I wanted to be a broadcaster. I wanted to be on ESPN. I wanted to be like Bob Costas, talking everything Olympics. And it really was the 1996 Olympics in Atlanta that really cemented that this is what I wanted to do with my life. And all of my schooling and earliest internships in college all were on this path to set me up for success to be a sports broadcaster. And fast forward to spring of my senior year of college, it was my final internship before graduating. It was at Fox 29. So this was the Fox Philadelphia affiliate television station. And I was showing my demo tape to my internship supervisor, figuring I'd just, brag a little bit. And this was a demo tape mostly filled with highlights from my college's TV station. And I was really proud of it. And literally within like a minute of the supervisor viewing this tape, he kind of, was scratching his head and basically said, Jamie, you're too local. I'm sorry. And basically what he was suggesting was that because I'm from Delaware County, from Delco, that the way I was pronouncing things would not have set me up for success on a national stage. And at the time, I was 21 and quite impressionable, and this was somebody of authority. And I lost my confidence and felt like I had no choice but to kind of listen to what the supervisor's advice was, which was consider a role behind the scenes, producing, writing. I still sent out the demo tape to 50 news stations around the country, kind of as a Hail Mary attempt, like, I can still do this. And crickets, heard back from nobody. And it was both his words as well as the outcome of not getting any interest from that demo tape that I was like, yeah, maybe I am too local and I need to, make a pivot. So I'll pause there, but that's basically how my end of my broadcast career came to be.
Crashing down. Well, first of all, let's fast forward to 2025 and 2026. And I mean, Delco's all the rage now with all of this stuff with Task and Mayor of Easttown and all of those things, if you had only seen. But that, I think, speaks to so many of us who have this vision of what we want our lives to be. And for whatever reason, and unfortunately, sometimes it can be people that we respect and believe what they say that can really derail us. So that being said, but also the fact that sometimes it's not going to work out the way we want it to, really can be a sucker punch to, first of all, a young person and to your ego, your identity, to everything. So now the next question that begs to be asked is, how did you not end up just at a McDonald's saying, do you want fries with that for the rest of your life? And how did you figure out what your next step was going to be? And let me just pause here and say, no shade to anybody that works with at McDonald's, but when that's not your ideal and you have a vision in mind and then suddenly the rug's pulled out from under you, how do you make that pivot both mentally and actually?
Yeah. So it was a sucker punch, and of course it threw me into a tizzy for a little bit. And I did, before I fully made a pivot to another career path, which I'll mention in just one moment, I did try to do some behind the scenes things in the sports and broadcasting world just to see if that would bring me joy, and it really did not. So that's when I sought out my mom for some advice. I really look up to my mom and always have. And I figured she would have some sound advice for me. And her advice shocked me, actually. She suggested that I have a conversation with my cousin Jeff. It turned out worked at the Rittenhouse Hotel, and it was a career. It was not just a job. And he was immensely passionate about working and serving others. And she thought it might be interesting for me to have a conversation with him to learn what it was like to work in luxury hospitality. And at the Rittenhouse Hotel where he had worked, I had heard of this hotel, but I had most definitely never stepped foot in that property ever before. And the conversation I had with him was really eye-opening. And it made me realize that I am most definitely not a sit at a desk in a cubicle type worker. That does not serve my personality. And he, expressed all of the really interesting elements of working in a hotel. And I was an athlete growing up. And also, when you work in a hotel, all of the different departments come together as a team to serve the customer. And that was also fascinating to me. So he was not able to get me a job. He was able to just get me an interview. And it turned out that's all that I needed. I must have done something right at the interview. I thought I was actually going in to interview to be a front desk agent. And it turned out that they ultimately offered me the position of a concierge. And it changed my entire life with that job offer. And I was 22 at the time. And I don't even think I fully understood what it was going to do for me and really all of the intricacies of a concierge, but it was a springboard at that point.
Well, there's so many things that you talk about here that I reference in terms of living this brilliantly with this brilliantly resilient mentality. And a big part of it is looking at what's important to you. And you mentioned a couple of things. You talked about like working with the team and just the energy of being, not behind a desk and all of those things. So a lot of it, when you can't find that what you perceive to be that perfect place that you always envisioned you'd land, often you have to go back to your values and what's important to you and look for things that feed that elsewhere. And not that you're going to know right away, but you have to at least take that leap of faith and go, all right, this is speaking to me in some way. And sometimes that means allowing your, the gut to say, yeah, I think this might be a leap that we want to take. And that's a lot of times what resilience is. It's not about, getting up and following a very specific path. It's a lot of times about going, all right, I'm going to give this a go and see what happens. So take us further, because this seems to be the moment that you didn't know was going to change your life, but you were able to take the leap anyway.
Absolutely. And when I said yes to being a concierge, truthfully, I thought it was still just going to be my next job. I had no idea initially that it was setting me up for an entirely different career path, and one that has turned out to be amazing. And I feel so appreciative that I had. One thing that's really interesting, though, and again, I don't know if this was on my mom's radar, but it turned out to be perfect, is if you look at transferrable skills, and I know that you talk about this a lot,
I
but
do.
I am an innately curious person. And that really was what I enjoyed about journalism, is that when
Mm.
you are interviewing somebody and about to write a story about them or talk about them, in a TV bit, you have to ask probing questions and fact finding and who, what, when, where, why. Well, what's interesting, and again, I didn't know it at the time, but as a concierge, you need to be innately curious, and you have to ask questions of the guest and get to know them so you can make sure you're making the most perfect recommendation that suits them. So when somebody says, suggest an Italian restaurant for me, the Italian restaurant that I might suggest for you, Mary Fran, might be very different from the Italian restaurant that I'm going to suggest for the family that has young kids, or the couple that needs a quick Italian meal before the orchestra. So that curiosity ended up being this transferable skill that really set me up for success. And I do think it's kind of this, it's an innate skill. I don't think everybody is curious, but for me, oh my goodness, it was such a fit, both in journalism as well as being a concierge.
I think you hit on another one of the things that is really important for people to recognize. And that is that the things that are innate to us come easily. Consequently, they are often the things that we dismiss as just something we do, when they are actually the things that we need to lean into, because those are the things that bring us the most satisfaction. And to your point about it being a transferable skill, there's not one way to use these things. You can apply the things that you are innately good at or that come naturally to you in so many ways, if you just allow that to be one of your strengths and recognize it as such. So, you know this now, but was this something that developed over time, where, or did you ever have a light bulb moment like, oh my gosh, like I'm using all the stuff that I really like to do? Or did this just kind of develop naturally as you were being of service to these people?
So there was no light bulb moment, but I would say within the first few weeks on the job, it became apparent that I was in love, that I was so immensely passionate about this new role. Part of it was I had an unbelievable mentor, um, in Frank Marandino, and just seeing Frank be great at what he did and just wanting to kind of be a sponge and soak it all in. And keep in mind, I was coming into this job knowing nothing. So I actually think that's one of the best types of employees you can have, which is I didn't come in with any bad habits. I didn't have any habits. I just came in knowing that I wanted to watch somebody be great and then come up with my own version of being great. But no, very quickly, so no light bulb moment, but very quickly I realized this works for me and I love it and it doesn't feel like work. So that's what I should be after, right?
So, did that involve at some point a release for you of the things that you thought you were supposed to be doing? Like a mental, okay, I'm not there, but this is really cool, so I can let that go, at least for now, and really invest in the current opportunity.
Great question. So I would say yes and no. the fact that I was working at this luxurious upscale property and I was getting to meet a lot of really, big named people, made for some really interesting discussions with friends and family. And they thought it was really cool what I was doing. I think there were two things, though, that were still bothering me slightly. And one is that when you work in a hotel, especially as an hourly worker, it's not a role where you would need a college degree. And I
Mm-hmm.
feel like I had a lot of guilt, maybe not judgment, but just from others, but guilt that I wasn't using my education, I wasn't using my degree. And some people around me, of course, did have degrees that were my colleagues, but other people did not. Yet they were doing the same job as me, so that was somewhat complicated. And yeah, I think I am such a high achiever and a perfectionist, so there were definitely some of those thoughts still swirling in me, like, am I really doing? Is this the best that I can do?
Living
And
up to whatever yeah, exactly. That idea of being where you're supposed to be.
absolutely. And some people, they are a concierge for their whole career. That is their path. The other thing I realized pretty quickly was that as much as I loved this job, for me, it was setting me up for future stepping stones. I did not see myself as a concierge for the next 30, 40 years. And that did
Hmm.
become apparent pretty quickly.
So, what I try to express to people and what you are illustrating so perfectly by your path and your journey is that when we have these innate skills, when we have these things that we are drawn to, often that leap of faith allows us to really solidify the things that we're good at. And that doesn't necessarily keep us stuck. It should allow us to recognize, okay, here are my strengths. Now, where else can I use them? And that's, I think, the best way to approach any kind of life because really, how many of us, I say this all the time, how many of us have a plan that even works out for a full day? You wake up in the morning and, oh, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. By the end of the day, you're like, how did I end up over here when I was supposed to go in the opposite direction? So that ability to just look at yourself, see where you're strong and not dismiss it because it comes naturally to you, which I think is so important because we feel like in this country, if things don't require blood, sweat, and tears, we tend to think, oh, well, that's just something that I do. But then see how those things can carry you forward in your life's evolution is so important. So, how did you then continue to evolve?
So again, it could have been very easy to just coast and just be like, great, I've got a fabulous job as a concierge. This is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. I am not a coaster and I have always such high expectations for myself. So a couple things that I did is I ended up working at the Rittenhouse Hotel for just under 3 years. But within the first 6 months of that job, when I realized that hospitality was what was bringing me joy, I started getting my master's degree at Temple in the School of Sport Tourism and Hospitality Management. I didn't have to do that, but it felt like the right thing to do to further my knowledge. And I felt like that was going to set me up for success for perhaps for future opportunities. I didn't know what they were going to be yet, but that just felt like
The right thing.
the
Yep.
right thing. And then ultimately, after just under 3 years at the Rittenhouse, I felt like it was time to make a move. Not because I was loving the job at the Rittenhouse. The factors that were pushing me out the door had to do with I didn't have a set schedule. I was working nights and weekends. I had the least seniority on the concierge team. So I was the one, when the Eagles were in the Super Bowl back in '05, I was the one working, even though I'm a huge football fan. So there were some factors out of my control, and all of my friends and family worked Monday through Friday day jobs, right, and had the
Right.
weekend off. So there was some external factors that were weighing on me. So I knew I wanted to stay in hospitality. But I needed to find a position that ideally was Monday through Friday, was a set schedule, and could allow me a better work-life balance as I continue to also pursue and complete my master's degree. So that's kind of what led me to my next opportunity.
And that next opportunity was similar? Was it something that was slightly different? Like, in other words, instead of just going from job to job, I think from what I'm hearing is that at that point you were really starting to recognize the things about you personally, your personality, your strengths, and I talk about values a lot and what was important to you and kind of allowing yourself to be a more active part of the equation. Because I think when we're a young person, you have all these big dreams, and then of course life comes along and goes, yeah, well, you're not going to do that, at least not right away. And we feel like we're settling because we don't recognize that life is stepping stones. But at some point, in order to really move forward and take action effectively, you have to have that understanding of yourself and what's important in order to find contentment. So, how much of that was part of it, and how were you then able to transfer that to your next position?
So one of the things I was noticing at the Rittenhouse Hotel with the concierge profession is the day-to-day tasks of the job were not changing or pushing me anymore. Really, the only thing that was changing was the city was evolving, and there was closures and openings of different restaurants, different stores, and that was forcing me to just keep my finger on the pulse of the city. But otherwise, I feel like I wasn't being challenged so much anymore in terms of if you've made 50 dinner reservations at Zahav, the 51st isn't so exciting anymore, nor is the 52nd. So as I moved over to the residences at 2 Liberty Place, I knew I still wanted to serve others. That wasn't going away, but I needed to find ways to kind of keep it fresh. And one of the things that was most definitely fresh and exciting about this next position was they weren't open yet. So I was
Oh,
on the pre-opening team to get services ready for the very first homeowner that was moving into the residences at 2 Liberty Place. And honestly, it's one of the most exciting things I've ever done in my entire work history is for that first year, nobody lived at 2 Liberty yet. We had to figure it out and decide what is it that what is the lifestyle going to look like at this community? And I got to literally lead the charge and figure that out and create the entire amenity package for all of the homeowners. And another exciting piece was I conducted all of these, I refer to them as owner interviews. So when somebody settled on their home, but before they moved in, I literally, again, using my journalism skills, interviewed them and found out what their likes were, their dislikes, their hopes and dreams for living at 2 Liberty, and then was able to really provide a personalized experience for them once they were actually set to move in.
so again, we're talking about all of this background and your feelings that you weren't necessarily using your education earlier. I think the challenge is that we have these societally imposed preconceived ideas of what that looks like. Like when you have a degree in sports journalism or whatever, well, you should be a sports journalist. But when we step back and recognize the skill set that's involved in whatever your degree is or whatever you choose to do, we do recognize that parts of that can be transferred in so many different ways. And I think that's one of the things that I really want to get across to people is that you have this idea of what life is supposed to be, what life should be. And what I say all the time is once we let go of the should be's, we make room for the could be's.
Mm.
So you're really speaking to that and to these opportunities that came along that really allowed you to use the skills that you had previously built up. Now, did you recognize that at the time? Or were you just like, just doing it, in other words?
No, I actually think I did. And things that I started to miss from my journalism backgrounds that I did not get to do at the Rittenhouse, such as writing, I
Hmm.
found ways to incorporate that at 2 Liberty. So for example, we had a monthly newsletter. I would do write-ups of new restaurants that would open. On Fridays, I would send out to the residents kind of a top 10 list of suggestions for the weekend. So no, I found ways because I really, really was missing writing.
Yes.
So I found ways to incorporate all of that, plus the owner interviews, which again felt like interviewing, um, and bringing back all those who, what, when, where, why questions. So no, I feel like that felt like I was using, it wasn't sports journalism, but I was using those skill sets in journalism that I knew I loved and was good at, and still was getting to serve others, which I realized I loved while working at the Rittenhouse. So yes, it was a good fit.
And I think that's so important to recognize that these things can be moved in different directions, and it's important that people speak up and say, okay, here's a thought. How about we try something like this? Because the truth of the matter is, if you're really good at something, not everybody else in the room is, and they may not even have thought of the thing that would A, bring you joy, and B, serve the team. And again, let's go back to that because you said that was one of the things that was really important to you with the sports background and everything. You really created an opportunity for yourself to become an integral part of a team and bring your skill set to that in the opening of this residence.
Yes, and one thing that I got to do again, being on the pre-opening team, is I got to also create and build the opening team. I was the first hire. The second hire was our phenomenal general manager, but there was nobody else. Before we could even hire people, we had to figure out what should staffing levels look like? What do we need based on how many people are going to actually live here? And it was so fun to kind of get to put on a HR hat and really figure out, okay, I've never interviewed somebody before, but let's try that skill. So it allowed me to really test out different skill sets. And I realized that I loved kind of all of these different aspects, almost like being a project manager. It was really
Mhm.
exciting.
I find everything that you say so fascinating because it really speaks to everything that I talk about in terms of, you have to be true to your values. You have to recognize that those innate things that you feel like, oh, that's just something that I do. Not everybody else can do those things. And there are ways to bring them to the different things and the different opportunities. But the thing that really is striking to me is you are willing to evolve and to allow your work situation to evolve without really knowing what it was going to lead you to, and but knowing that it wasn't where you wanted or at least thought you were supposed to be. So that whole idea of evolution, I mean, that speaks to me, but you recognized at the time that that was something that was happening, I would assume. And now you had other things that happened too in your personal life that caused you to have to pull into this resilience. So let's switch gears a little bit and talk about that because so many of us, when we feel like we're established or when we feel like, okay, I got the foundation under me, something happens to screw that up. So, where were you personally at the time?
So we need to fast forward in time for a little bit. So I ultimately was a concierge for 10 years and then decided I was ready for my next adventure. I was getting married and I just felt like I was ready for um, just additional growth. And I had finished my master's degree by then. I had started doing some adjunct teaching while still serving as a concierge and realized that I really was enjoying that aspect of teaching and training, and also was leading new hire orientations at Two Liberty, and ultimately figured I needed to find a new job. And I didn't think Craigslist was going to have it. I needed to create it myself. So I became a consultant and a trainer and a keynote speaker on all things customer experience. And my business was founded back in the spring of 2014. And that backstory is important because then, as a business owner, there were a variety of things that occurred that one I could have predicted, the other two I could not have, but definitely required me to have to kind of internally find ways to keep plowing forward. So I'm a team of one as a solopreneur, and I knew that
Hmm.
my husband and I were ready to start a family. And I didn't know what that was going to look like in terms of as a business owner, because you can't exactly be traveling the country speaking 9 months pregnant, and certainly also can't be booking speaking engagements while you're breastfeeding a young child like a month after
Yeah.
she's born. So
Be a
I kind
challenge.
of I feel like just as I had a lot of good momentum in the first couple years of my business, I kind of had to unfortunately put the brakes on as we started our family. And that wasn't too big of a hurdle, but it was enough of a hurdle that I felt like, in a way, I had to restart my business again on the other side of that when I really was ready to full time be back as business owner. And then, Mary Fran, do you want me to go through some of the other moments of
Whatever you
resiliency,
feel
or
is
should I pause there?
pertinent, whatever you feel is pertinent, because I think sometimes we feel, oh, thank God, I finally found the thing and I'm happy with the thing. And then something happens to derail the thing. And those things happen to all of us. And it takes a certain mentality, and that's, I guess, where I want to go with this, to figure out how to kind of either get things back on track or evolve within those situations to build or rebuild something that gives you some of that same thing with the other things that you're dealing with in your life.
Yeah. So when my daughter was around, I think 2.5, and I felt like my foot was clearly back on the gas pedal. As a business owner, things were feeling really good. Then my husband unexpectedly was diagnosed with a type of leukemia, blood cancer,
Oh,
which was
goodness.
immensely scary. He's fine now, but it required a bone marrow transplant and a
Oh,
month-long stay in the hospital.
oh my
He
gosh.
ultimately had to take a year off of work. So that derailed a lot of forward momentum that I had had as a business owner. And I was certainly, primary care provider for my daughter, and there were a lot of factors at play there. And then, just as momentum was good again, and my husband was back at work, then the pandemic came upon us.
That was fun, wasn't it?
Yes, and like so many folks that had touch of the hospitality industry, when everything was shut down, there was no work for me, and I had just landed in February of 2020, a month before the pandemic.
Oh,
I had just landed my best client to date on like a 6 month retainer. It
oh,
was a healthcare system. I
oh
was
my
so excited
goodness.
and so passionate about it. And I had just started. And by the first week of April, the my client was basically calling me to say, Jamie, we unfortunately have to put a stop this contract, put a hold on things. And of course, it wasn't a pause. It was an
Yeah.
end to the
This
contract
is done.
forever.
Yeah, this is done before it starts. Yeah.
Yeah, so there was a kind of a trifecta of things in the span of, I guess, just like 4+ years, that was ba-boom, ba-boom, ba-boom. But you know what? You keep getting back up, and I feel like they make you stronger, right?
Well, and I think the important thing is to realize, look, this is the reality. I can't fix this. I can't change the reality. So where do I go from here? And I can relate to the story personally, because when my former partner and I started Brilliantly Resilient, we had our first big event on March 7th of 2020. And the next week, March 14th, everything shut down. Everything. And we had planned this as like a speaking program and live events and all that stuff. And we were like, oh my God, now what do we do? There are just times when you don't have control over the situation. But you do have some control over how you respond to that. Now, that doesn't mean that there's a golden lining. I'm not one of these people that goes, "Oh, well, there's a silver lining and everything." Yeah, I don't know about that. I'm not so sure. Something that's that awful is still going to be that awful. But that doesn't mean that you have to come to a complete and full stop. It does mean that you might have some opportunity to rethink things
Hmm.
and to, again, look for different ways to bring your skill set to the forefront. So we ended up doing a show that we did every day of the pandemic, and we did it live on Facebook and all that. So it wasn't necessarily bringing in money, but it was helping us to build this platform. So there are ways. So what did you end up doing at that point to, okay, we had some momentum. I got to keep something going in a different way, but in some way.
So initially, I was really not in a good place, and I was cranky and upset, and all of my energy was shifting to parenting because my daughter could not go to her preschool. Preschool was closed. So on one hand, that was a good distraction that I was just forced into kind of stay-at-home mom. But that was not fulfilling enough for me, and I needed to find a professional outlet for myself. So I said, I've always wanted to write a book about my time behind the concierge desk. Guess what? Now I finally have the time to do so. So there was a virtual writing course that had come into my inbox that I never, ever, ever would have had time to sign up for in the past. But I was like, you know what? I'm gonna sign up for this course. And that ultimately, this was in April of 2020. And taking that course and kind of getting me excited about the process of writing, that really was the catalyst for my memoir, True Hospitality, to come out. And it came out 5 years, almost to the day, from that first virtual writing class in April
Wow.
of 2020. So that was my pivot. It was not throwing myself into business development or writing for my job. It was throwing myself into this cathartic walk down memory lane of writing about my foundation of why I love serving others.
And that again speaks to this idea of evolving and taking, I always say this, imperfect action. There's nothing that we can do that is the perfect action. There's always a but for, what's going to happen here. But when you look at the opportunities or the lack thereof that are in front of you, sometimes you have the opportunity to do that thing that's always been kind of in the back of your mind, and maybe it's time to explore that. And first of all, I can't tell you how much I've enjoyed this conversation. I think I could continue on this for another 3 hours, but you have given me so many things to think about, and I think the audience so many things to think about, but I want you to give us a couple more things to think about. How can you dish on one or two little things that you experienced while you were in the concierge spot that were stories that were just like really funny or really interesting? And not, you don't have to name names, but give me a couple of little insider stories about your concierge.
Sure. I will tease a few stories because I'm hoping, Mary Fran, that your listeners will consider buying my book. And I don't want to give away the entire story, but there
Absolutely.
is
Drop the
one
teasers.
one story that is quite memorable is before Botox was really a widely known medical procedure. And certainly before I knew what Botox was, and again, this was in 2004, and the FDA had only approved of Botox like the year prior. A guest of the hotel asked me to help them set up a Botox appointment. So again, picture me not even knowing what this
Oh
was
my
and
gosh.
having to figure out the necessary steps to making that happen. So that's the one story I'll kind of tease.
Oh my
Um,
gosh.
the second story was about a missing cat that I was named Ruby, who I was helping care for while Ruby's parents were on vacation. And I thought it was going to be, oh, what could go wrong? I'm only going to be away from my desk for just a few minutes, feeding and scooping poop. Well, a lot could go wrong when a cat goes missing. So I'll pause there, but those are kind of two of the many stories that are found within my book that are somewhat hilarious.
Oh my gosh. Well, Jamie Cooperstein, I cannot tell you what a delight this conversation has been. Please, everybody, check out Jamie's book, True Hospitality: Lessons Learned from Behind the Concierge Desk. You have so many wise things to offer us in terms of trusting your values, digging into what comes naturally to you and valuing it and acknowledging it, and being willing to evolve and take those imperfect action steps and be willing to entrust it with a little bit of faith to see what comes of life, and it can be a wonderful thing. So tell us where we can learn more about you, Jamie.
Sure. So I am super active on LinkedIn, and it's actually one of my favorite outlets to write and share content and share stories. So J. Cooperstein on LinkedIn, you can absolutely connect with me, and I look forward to you being inspired by some of my customer service storytelling. My website is www.jcoopconsulting.com, and I'm also on Instagram at jcoopconsulting.
Yay, so good. Please, please, please check Jamie out. As you have heard, she has wonderful stories to tell. She is insightful, she is wise, and I think you will just get some delight out of following Jamie and reading that book. And if you need a little more inspiration, head on over to brilliantlyresilient.net. You can sign up for our Brilliance Bit, of which Jamie will be a part when this episode airs. And I will see you next time on the next episode of the Brilliantly Resilient podcast. Bye, everybody. Thanks for joining me for another episode of the Brilliantly Resilient podcast. Now, before you go, remember this. Resilience isn't about bouncing back to who you were. It's about becoming who you're meant to be. If today's episode helped you reset, rise, or see your brilliance a little more clearly, I invite you to take the next step with me. Explore the Brilliantly Resilient resources, including the podcast, books, and the new Brilliantly Resilient mini course series, all designed to meet you exactly where you are. You can learn more and get started at brilliantlyresilient.net. Until next time, stay steady, stay curious, and keep moving forward, one resilient step at a time.